He's feared across nations, the wolf of the Italian underworld, ruthless, untouchable, untamed. But one call shatters his empire, a diagnosis that strips him of the one thing he never knew he needed, a legacy, the woman he loved, the life he walked away from, and a child he may never know, all at the mercy of enemies lurking in every shadow. Tonight, the most dangerous man in Italy will face a choice no one expects, power or love, and everything he holds dear hangs by a thread. Before we dive in, I want to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I'd love to see how far the wolf's story reaches tonight. The lights in the underground casino burned low, amber and heavy with smoke. A jazz saxophone wailed somewhere beyond the velvet curtains, muffled by the sound of chips clattering and the low hum of voices that spoke in money, not words. Luciano Rossi sat at the head of the private table, his leather jacket open, collar turned up, a cigarette glowing between his fingers. The cards in his hand meant nothing. The phone vibrating in his pocket did. Marco Moretti, his right-hand man, caught the flicker of unease across Luciano's sharp features. "Something wrong, boss?" Luciano didn't answer. He rose without a word, walked past the guards, and stepped into the narrow hallway that led to his private office. The hallway smelled of bourbon and rain from the night outside. When he answered the call, the voice on the other end trembled with the weight of what it carried. "Mr. Rossi, I've got the final results. I wish I had better news." Luciano's fingers tightened around the phone. "Speak plainly, doctor." There was a pause, and then the words came. Soft, clinical, merciless. "Permanent infertility. It's irreversible. I'm sorry." The line went quiet except for the low hum of electricity. Luciano didn't breathe for a full 10 seconds. The smoke from his cigarette curled upward, dissolving into nothing. He hung up without replying. For a moment he stood still, just a man in a silent corridor, with a truth too heavy to fit inside his chest. Then slowly the facade returned. The Don straightened his jacket, slipped the phone into his pocket, and walked back into the casino. But everything looked different now. The laughter, the women, the cards, it all felt hollow. He'd built an empire, a dynasty written in fear and loyalty, yet now there would be no heir to inherit the name Rossi, and that was the first thing that broke him. The second was a memory. Soft brown eyes and a laugh that had once melted the ice in his chest. Isabella. The name hit like a blade between the ribs. He hadn't spoken it in months, hadn't allowed himself to even think it. But now it echoed in his mind with every beat of his heart. Isabella, the one light he had ever known. He pictured her hands, gentle and clean, hands that didn't know the smell of gun oil or blood. She had been the one place where he could breathe, where the world wasn't built on fear or power, and he had already lost her. No, not lost, abandoned. Luciano walked to the back exit. The rain outside fell hard, soaking through his hair as thunder rolled over the city. The neon sign above the casino flickered red against his leather jacket, bleeding color across the puddles. He got into his car, the engine growling like a caged animal. Marco appeared at the driver's side, umbrella in hand. "Where to?" Luciano lit another cigarette, eyes fixed on the windshield. "To her." Marco hesitated. "Boss, it's been 2 years. She's not—" Luciano cut him off. "To her." The car slipped into the night. The rain painted the city silver. Every streetlight flashed across Luciano's face, revealing a storm behind his calm expression. He didn't speak. The sound of rain on the windshield became the only rhythm. He had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in his head, how he would see her again, what he would say, what he wouldn't. But every version of the memory ended with silence, because what could he offer her now? A man with blood on his hands and a curse in his veins. When they reached her street, Luciano told Marco to stop a block away. He sat there for a long time, cigarette smoke swirling like ghosts inside the car. Through the rain-streaked window, he could see the faint light from her apartment window. She was home. Luciano stepped out, leaving Marco in the car. The rain soaked through his clothes instantly. He didn't care. Every step up the narrow staircase felt like walking toward a confession. He reached her door and hesitated. His hand hovered over the doorbell. For a second, he almost turned back, but he couldn't. The truth demanded a sacrifice, and tonight he would make it. When the door opened, Isabella stood there in a loose sweater, her dark hair tied back, eyes wide with disbelief. "Luciano?" His name on her lips nearly undid him. He'd forgotten how gentle her voice could be. He swallowed the ache in his throat. "I need to talk to you." She stepped aside without a word. The scent of her apartment, coffee, vanilla, and rain, hit him like a memory he wasn't ready for. Everything about the place was warm, alive, untouched by the rot of his world. She crossed her arms, nervous. "It's been 2 years. Why are you here?" Luciano looked around, searching for words that didn't exist. His reflection in the window looked like a stranger, tattoos crawling up his neck, beard shadowed, eyes dark and empty. "I came to end what should have been ended long ago," he said finally. Her eyes narrowed. "And what?" "Us." The word fell like a stone between them. Isabella laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "You already ended us, Luciano, the night you vanished without a word." He took a step closer, his voice low and controlled. "You deserve more than what I am. My world is a cage, Bella. You deserve the open sky." Her eyes glistened. "And who decided that? You?" "Yes." His answer came fast, sharp. "Because I know what happens to the people who stand too close to me. They disappear, or they bleed." She stared at him for a long moment, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. "You think walking away protects me? That breaking me protects me?" He looked away, jaw tight. "It's the only way I know." Silence hung heavy in the room. The rain against the window was the only sound. Finally, Isabella whispered, "I loved you, Luciano. I still—" "Don't," he said, almost pleading. His control cracked for just a second, his eyes betraying the pain behind them. "Don't make this harder than it already is." He turned toward the door. His hand lingered on the knob. Her voice followed him, trembling. "Then at least tell me the truth. Why now? Why come here?" He paused, his reflection faint in the glass of the window. The truth sat like a weight in his throat. "Because I can never give you the family you dreamed of. Because I am broken in ways you can't fix." But he didn't say it. He couldn't. Instead, he said softly, "Goodbye, Bella." The door clicked shut behind him. Outside, the rain hadn't stopped. Marco was waiting by the car, umbrella ready. He looked at Luciano's face and didn't ask. He could see everything in his eyes. "You did the right thing, boss," Marco said quietly. Luciano didn't respond. He got into the car, the leather creaking under his weight. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel. As the engine rumbled to life, lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating his face, stone hard, unreadable, but his hand trembled once, just once. He pressed his foot down, the car roaring into the darkness. Behind him, through the fogged window of the apartment above, Isabella stood with her hand over her mouth, tears mixing with the rain. Neither of them saw the figure across the street watching from the shadows, camera in hand, lens glinting under a streetlight. The camera shutter clicked once, capturing the Don's face in the storm. A message was sent moments later. Target confirmed. Rossi made contact. Morning sunlight spilled across the small apartment, turning the dust in the air into slow-moving gold. Isabella Conti stood by the window, a cup of coffee cooling between her palms. 2 years had passed since the night Luciano Rossi walked out of her life. Yet the echo of that door closing still lived somewhere inside her chest. Every sound in the apartment carried memory: the kettle's whistle, the creak of the floor, the the faint scent of tobacco that had once clung to his clothes. Time had dulled none of it. It had only buried the pain under a quieter ache. Sophia arrived unannounced, her knock brisk, her energy sharp as ever. She tossed her sunglasses onto the counter. "You're still brooding before breakfast," she said, half smiling, half scolding. Isabella gave a tired laugh. "I'm not brooding, I'm existing." "Existing isn't living, Bella." Sophia leaned against the counter. "You've built a fortress out of your grief. Maybe it's time to open the gates." Isabella turned away. "You make it sound easy." "It's not," Sophia said softly, her tone changing. "But you can't keep holding on to someone who let you go. He made his choice. You have to make yours." Those words hit like quiet thunder. Isabella didn't answer. The coffee had gone cold in her hands. She poured it down the sink. Later that week, Sophia convinced her to go on a blind date. "It's dinner." "Not a proposal," her sister had insisted. The restaurant was small, all brick walls and candlelight. Isabella almost turned back twice before walking in. She hated the idea of trying to laugh again. Then Daniel Reed stood to greet her. He wasn't dazzling, not like the ghosts that haunted her memory. His presence was calm, grounded. A gentle face, blue eyes that carried patience instead of secrets. A school teacher, Sophia had said, a man who spent his days teaching literature to restless teenagers and still found it fulfilling. They talked about books, about childhood, about the difference between peace and silence. Daniel spoke like a man who listened more than he talked. For the first time in years, Isabella laughed, and it startled her. After dinner, he walked her to her car. The night was cool, the air smelling faintly of rain. "I had a good time," he said. "So did I." When he smiled, it wasn't confident or rehearsed. It was just kind. He didn't touch her, didn't push, simply nodded goodnight. That small restraint made her chest ache with unexpected gratitude. Weeks turned into months. The hollow places in Isabella's life began to fill with small, ordinary things. Music while cooking, morning runs through the park, shared jokes with Daniel over coffee. He met Sophia once, and even she, the eternal skeptic, had to admit he was good for Isabella. "He looks at you like you're real," she said, "not like you're a memory he's chasing." Still, at night, when the city quieted, the past whispered through the cracks. Luciano's name would surface in her dreams, his voice, low and rough, saying her name like it meant something sacred. She would wake with her heart racing, staring at the ceiling, angry at herself for still missing him. One afternoon, while helping Daniel grade essays at his kitchen table, she noticed something strange. A small scar near his wrist, faint but recent. "What happened?" she asked. "Oh, that?" He laughed softly. "School accident. A kid knocked over a glass beaker during lab." The explanation made sense. His smile made it believable. Yet something in her gut stirred. A flicker of the old instinct that had once kept her alive in a dangerous love. She brushed it away. Not everyone lied. Not everyone lived behind masks. But the unease stayed, quiet and patient. By early autumn, she began to write again. Her journal had been untouched since the breakup, a collection of pages soaked in pain. She filled new pages now, not with sorrow, but with fragments of new life. Moments with her sister, lines from poems Daniel had quoted, small hopes she hadn't dared to write before. One evening, she sat by the window, candlelight dancing over the paper. Outside, the rain had returned, the same sound that had once marked the end of everything. Now it sounded softer, almost forgiving. She wrote until her hand cramped. Then she flipped to the back of the journal. There, between the last entries written 2 years ago, was the story she'd never finished, The Wolf and the Sky, a metaphor for a love she'd lost. Her pen hovered over the page. She could end it tonight, tear it out, and finally be free. Sophia's words echoed in her mind. "You can't hold on to someone who let you go." She drew a breath and began to tear the page, but the paper resisted slightly, as if something were pressed within. She paused. Carefully, she opened the last few sheets. A single red rose, perfectly dried, slipped out and fell onto her lap. Her breath caught. The petals were fragile, preserved with care. The scent, faint, familiar, hit her like a ghost. She stared at it, disbelief freezing her. That rose had meaning. The last one Luciano had ever given her had looked exactly like this. Her apartment door was locked, her windows sealed. The journal had been in her drawer, untouched for months. The candle flickered as if the air itself had shifted. She rose slowly, scanning the room. Everything looked the same, the pictures, the books, the quiet order she'd built to keep the world at bay. Yet the presence of that rose made it all feel invaded. She crossed the room to the window, pulled the curtain aside. Down on the street, the rain fell hard under the yellow streetlights. Nothing moved, and then, just for a heartbeat, she saw it. A black car, parked half a block away, engine idling. The driver's silhouette barely visible through the rain-streaked glass. The headlights blinked once, twice like a signal, then turned off. Her pulse pounded. She stepped back from the window, clutching the rose, like proof that the past had not stayed buried. In the silence, the candle guttered out, leaving the room in soft darkness. The phone on her desk buzzed, a message from an unknown number. No name, no greeting, just 4 words glowing on the screen. He never stopped watching. Isabella's hand trembled around the phone as thunder rolled outside. She turned back toward the window. The car was gone. Only the reflection of her own frightened face stared back, framed by the rose in her hand, as a whisper of memory, deep, unmistakable, seemed to murmur from the shadows. You can't outrun the wolf. The city had changed its rhythm, or maybe Isabella had simply stopped listening to the parts that hurt. Her days were soft now, predictable. Mornings that began with sunlight filtering through linen curtains, coffee brewing, and the faint echo of classical music from the radio Daniel always kept on. The chaos that once defined her life had been replaced by quiet repetition. It should have felt like peace. It almost did. Daniel Reed fit neatly into this new order. His presence filled the spaces that had once been silence. He was the kind of man who remembered small things. Her favorite tea, the way she liked her books organized by author, not genre. His kindness was steady, unthreatening, and the more he smiled at her, the more she tried to convince herself that this calm, this safety, was happiness. But sometimes, at night, when Daniel slept beside her and the moonlight touched the window, she would open her eyes and feel a shadow pressing against her chest. A whisper of something unspoken, a scent of cologne in her memory, dark, musky, impossible to forget. Luciano's scent. She'd shake it off, blame it on dreams, but the ache it left behind never fully faded. At the hospital where she worked, Isabella's co-workers noticed the change in her. The laugh that had returned to her voice, the color in her cheeks. They teased her gently about Daniel and she smiled, playing along. But every so often as she walked through the parking lot at dusk, she felt eyes on her. A black car idling a few spaces away, same model, same tinted windows. It never followed her, never moved closer, but she could feel it. Once she stopped and stared directly at it, heart pounding. The engine turned off. Silence. Then, as if to prove her paranoia wrong, the car door opened and a woman stepped out. Phone in hand, ordinary, harmless. Isabella exhaled and forced herself to laugh. Still, the feeling of being watched stayed long after the car was gone. Across the street, unseen, Marco Moretti sat in another vehicle, a nondescript sedan with rain-smeared windows. He hadn't spoken to Luciano in weeks. The boss didn't need reminders. The order had been clear. No one touches her. Marco followed that command with the devotion of a man guarding a saint from the sins of the world. He knew the boss didn't want Isabella disturbed, but he also knew enemies didn't care about love stories. He watched her leave the hospital carrying her bag, her white coat folded neatly. The evening light made her hair glow. For a moment he understood why Luciano still haunted her shadow. He spoke into his earpiece quietly. Subject clear, heading home. Static. Then a brief voice from the other end. Copy that. He drove away before she noticed him, disappearing into the blur of city traffic. That night, Isabella cooked dinner for Daniel. Pasta, simple and warm. He poured wine, told stories from school, students who mixed chemicals wrong, laughter echoing in his words. He was good at making ordinary sound golden. At one point, he reached across the table and took her hand. Bella, he said, using the nickname no one else dared. You know we can build something real, right? You and me. She hesitated, her fork halfway to her mouth. The words something real lingered in the air like perfume. She smiled faintly. I want to believe that. He squeezed her hand gently. Then believe it. Not every story has to end in tragedy. His voice was soft, but it landed like a stone in her chest. Because deep down, she knew every story had an ending. It was only a matter of time before the past demanded to be acknowledged. They finished dinner in comfortable silence, but when Daniel stepped into the other room to take a phone call, Isabella caught her reflection in the darkened window. Her own eyes looked back, tired, uncertain, still carrying a kind of mourning she thought she had buried. She closed the curtains. Later, she curled on the couch with a blanket, trying to read. Daniel returned, phone in hand, expression unreadable. Everything okay? She asked. He smiled too quickly. Work stuff. You know how parents get when their kids fail a test. She nodded, pretending to accept it. But something in his tone, the practiced ease, made her chest tighten. It was the same kind of calm Luciano used before a storm. She shook the thought away. Daniel wasn't Luciano. He was safe. She had to believe that. Hours later, long after Daniel had gone home, Isabella lay awake in bed. The wind moved the curtains like ghosts, and the apartment was filled with that fragile silence that feels like it's listening. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Unknown number. Again. She didn't open it this time. Instead, she turned it face down and closed her eyes. Sleep came, uneasy and fractured. Dreams flickered. Luciano's eyes, the sound of rain, the feeling of something slipping away just beyond reach. When she woke, it was with a hollow ache in her stomach and a strange dizziness she couldn't shake. She sat up slowly, pressing a hand to her forehead. Probably just exhaustion, she murmured to herself. But the nausea didn't fade. It came again the next morning. And again the day after. By the third day, Sophia noticed. You look pale. Are you eating enough? I'm fine, Isabella said too quickly. At the hospital, while sorting supplies, she felt the world tilt slightly. She caught herself against the counter, heart racing. A coworker glanced over. You okay? Yeah, she lied, forcing a smile. That night, she went home early. The apartment was quiet, Daniel's jacket still hanging over the chair. She stared at it for a long time, then opened the bathroom cabinet. The small white box stared back at her. The one she'd bought earlier that day tucked beneath a pile of bandages. She told herself she was being ridiculous. Stress. Nothing more. But something in her gut whispered otherwise. She tore open the box with shaking hands, followed the instructions, and set the test on the counter. 2 minutes felt like a lifetime. The city hummed outside her window. The clock ticked once, twice, endlessly. When she looked down, the result stared back, clear, undeniable, final. 2 lines. She froze. Every sound in the world seemed to vanish. Her knees weakened, and she sat down on the edge of the tub, staring at the result until her vision blurred. No, she whispered, voice breaking. No, this isn't possible. She covered her mouth with trembling fingers. Her mind raced. Timelines, impossibilities, what this meant, who it meant. Daniel's face flickered through her thoughts. Then, unbidden, Another face. Luciano's. The storm inside her chest returned, stronger than ever. In the mirror, she saw her own reflection. Pale, wide-eyed, haunted, and behind it, for just an instant, she thought she saw movement in the darkened hallway beyond the bathroom door. A shape, a shadow. She turned sharply. Nothing, just the sound of rain starting outside again. But when she looked back at the mirror, her breath caught, because on the fogged glass, faint and unmistakable, someone had traced 3 letters with a fingertip, LR. The initials glistened before the steam began to fade them away. Isabella staggered backward, clutching the counter. The test slipped from her fingers and clattered to the floor as lightning flashed outside, illuminating the apartment for a heartbeat. And in that heartbeat, the window curtain swayed open, revealing the same black car idling beneath the streetlight, headlights pulsing once before the engine died. She whispered into the silence, voice trembling, "Luciano, what are you trying to tell me?" The only reply was thunder. The morning sun crept through the blinds in thin, sharp lines. Isabella's apartment, usually a haven of muted warmth, felt suddenly smaller, closer, like it was pressing against her skin. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the small white test, her mind still reeling from the impossible truth. She'd always imagined Daniel's reaction would be joy, maybe fear, but gentle joy, the kind of cautious happiness she had come to trust in him. She wanted his hand on hers, a soft squeeze, reassurance that everything would be fine. Instead, when she told him, his expression froze. Not joy, not fear, just calculation. "Daniel?" Her voice faltered. The words felt alien, heavy. I'm pregnant." He tilted his head slightly, scanning her face like a man evaluating a chessboard. For a moment, she saw the man she thought she knew. Then she saw the cracks, the edges of something else, something cold. "Well," he said finally, slow, measured, and without inflection, "this changes things." Her heart skipped. Changes? How? How does this change things? He didn't answer immediately. He leaned back against the counter, hands in his pockets, calm as a lake in winter. Then, deliberately, he spoke. "We can use this," he said. Your child is the leverage we've been waiting for. With Rossi's blood running through your veins, we finally have a chance to end him." Isabella blinked. The words hit her chest like a fist. She stared at him, disbelief rooting her to the spot. "You... what?" Her voice was barely audible. This was all a lie? You're not Daniel?" His calm, precise smile widened slightly. "Daniel Reed was always a role, a part I played to get close, to earn your trust. You were perfect bait." The blood in her veins turned ice. Her stomach knotted. She felt lightheaded, like the floor beneath her might collapse. "You used me," she whispered, then louder, her voice breaking. "You used me." Her hands trembled, fists curling. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, emotions she had tried to bury, anger, betrayal, fear, all exploding at once. He shrugged, almost casually, as if her outrage were nothing more than the irritation of a fly. "You have no idea what you're in the middle of, Isabella. None at all." That moment, the apartment felt suddenly open, exposed. Shadows stretched long across the walls, twisting like dark fingers. Daniel moved past her, walking toward the door with that same measured precision he had carried all along. "You wait!" she shouted, but the words dissolved in the shock, the panic, the sudden realization of how alone she was. The door clicked shut behind him. The sound echoed in the apartment like a verdict. Isabella sank to her knees in the middle of the living room. Her hands clutched the floor, nails digging into the wood. She tried to steady her breath. The room swirled around her. Everything she had believed, everything she had trusted, had been nothing but a carefully constructed lie. She felt like the floor had dropped away, and then she realized she was being watched. From the darkness outside her apartment window, someone's eyes were trained on her, binoculars in hand. She couldn't see the face clearly, but the intent was unmistakable. Every instinct in her body screamed danger. "Got her," whispered a low voice into a receiver. Isabella's heart pounded in her ears. Her knees hit the floor with a dull thud as she tried to process the betrayal, the terror, the sudden weight of vulnerability pressing down on her. She couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. She could only stare at the window, shaking. As the shadow outside seemed to linger, silent and patient, watching her unravel, memories of Luciano Rossi flickered unbidden across her mind. His presence, his darkness, the promise of protection he had once offered. The wolf had been gone from her life for years, but suddenly, in the face of this new threat, she realized what she had truly lost. She thought of the rose, that single red rose carefully preserved, left without explanation. The lingering scent in her apartment had seemed like a whisper from the past, but now it felt like a warning. Outside, the rain began to fall softly, tapping against the glass. Each drop mirrored her heartbeat, rapid, uneven, uncontrollable. Her hands shook as she reached for her phone, fumbling to call someone she trusted. She didn't know who that could be. Daniel was gone, an enemy in disguise. The world she had built with cautious hope had cracked open. The shadows outside the window moved slightly, the faint reflection of binoculars catching a glint of light. The observer did not flinch, did not hesitate. Isabella's chest tightened as adrenaline surged. She clutched her stomach instinctively, a protective gesture she didn't understand fully yet, the weight of new life pressing against the danger in the room. Her thoughts raced. What would she do? Who could she trust? Could anyone truly protect her? The rain intensified, drumming against the glass like urgent Morse code. The apartment felt smaller, suffocating, every shadow magnified. Then, as she backed away from the window, a soft click sounded behind her. She turned sharply. Empty room. But the feeling persisted. Someone, something was waiting, watching, calculating. Her mind flashed to Luciano again, the man who had once been her storm, her danger, her protector. A part of her wanted to scream his name, to call out to the only person who had ever truly understood the chaos of her world. Instead, all she could do was sink to the floor, clutching the test, her body trembling as the night pressed in, and the shadow outside remained, silent, immovable. A whisper carried through the rain and the darkness, sharp and deliberate. Everything is ready. She's mine now. The black car engine started in the distance, and a figure slipped into the night, vanishing as quickly as it appeared. Isabella's breath hitched. She pressed herself against the wall, realizing with sudden cold clarity she was trapped in a game far bigger than she had ever imagined. And somewhere, out there, the wolf was watching too. His world and hers about to collide again. The city never slept, but tonight it felt unusually quiet. Luciano the wolf. Rossi sat in the dim glow of his office, a low hum of air conditioning and the faint crackle of static from his secure line filling the silence. His world, usually so controlled, seemed fragile. The call had come through earlier, brief and precise. A contact shrouded in caution had reported movement. Carter's men, circling someone named Isabella Conti. The name struck him like a lightning bolt. Luciano's hand tightened around the glass in front of him, the amber liquid sloshing over the edge. His gaze, dark and predatory, fixed on the city outside the window. Lights flickered like tiny stars, indifferent to the storm brewing in his chest. "Isabella," he murmured, the single word heavy with memory and pain. It carried the weight of all the years he had buried, all the nights he had spent empty, haunted by what could have been. He didn't move. He couldn't. He had trained himself to respond to threats, to strategy, to power, but nothing in his life had prepared him for this. Marco Moretti cleared his throat from the doorway. "Boss," he said carefully, "I can confirm the intel. Carter's men are close. She's—" His voice faltered. "She's pregnant." The words hit Luciano harder than any bullet ever could. For a long moment he said nothing. He just stared at the reflection in the polished wood of his desk, tattooed neck, dark eyes, stubble lining his jaw, and saw a man he barely recognized, a man whose control had always been absolute, yet who now trembled with a personal fear he couldn't name. "Pregnant," he whispered. Marco stepped forward. Careful, almost reverent. "Boss, we need a plan. She's vulnerable. This is no ordinary target. This is—" Luciano didn't hear him. His hand shook slightly as he lifted the glass to his lips. The whiskey burned as it went down, sharp, cleansing, a fleeting sense of courage. He set it back on the desk with deliberate force, and the reflection of his own eyes stared back at him, wild, unrestrained. Whose child? His voice was low, barely more than a growl, but it carried a weight that made Marco flinch. Marco met his gaze steadily. "Does it matter?" Luciano's jaw tightened. It did. It mattered more than anything. The world he had built, the control he had wielded, it all meant nothing if someone dared touch her, if anyone threatened the life that had suddenly become his responsibility. He rose from the chair, the leather creaking under the shift of his weight. The room seemed smaller, closing in as adrenaline coursed through his veins. His fingers clenched into fists, and the glass trembled in his grip. Marco watched him, steady and silent. He had seen the boss in countless battles, had witnessed bloodshed, loyalty, and betrayal, but never like this. Never with the fear of loss that wasn't abstract but intimate, personal, irreversible. Luciano slammed the glass onto the desk. It shattered with a sharp, resounding crash. Whiskey spilled across the polished surface, dripping into the cracks. A shard cut his palm, thin lines of red mixing with the amber liquid. He didn't flinch. "No one touches her," he said, voice low, lethal, every syllable a vow etched in blood. "No one." Marco's hand hovered near the radio. "Boss, what's the plan?" Luciano didn't answer immediately. He turned toward the window, rain streaking down the glass. His eyes were cold, calculating, alive with a storm that had lain dormant too long. He could see the city, the streets, the familiar silhouettes of danger and opportunity all mapped in his mind like a war table. He thought of Isabella, her laugh, her fear, the red rose that had appeared in her journal, the way she had crumpled in disbelief as Daniel's betrayal unfolded. Every memory was sharp, a knife in his chest that ignited fury and resolve in equal measure. He turned back to Marco, and for the first time in years, Luciano spoke not as a don managing an empire, but as a man whose heart had been stolen, whose soul had been tangled with someone else's fate. "Gather the team," he said. "Secure every exit. Surveillance on every street. Carter will think he's in control, but he's about to find out the wolf is awake." Marco nodded, understanding the layers beneath the words. This was no ordinary warning. It was a declaration. Luciano's fingers tightened again on another glass, never pouring, just gripping. Blood had dried faintly on his palm, a tangible reminder of how real the stakes were. Every decision, every step had to be precise. He began moving through the office, checking communications, scanning maps, reviewing intel. Each piece of information was another thread in a web that would trap his enemies before they even realized the net had closed. The shadows in the room seemed to flicker with him, echoing the pulse of his fury, his grief, and his unwavering determination. He was the predator again, but now the stakes were far more personal than territory or power. And then he paused. A single thought pierced the storm of his mind, a whisper in the darkness. "She is carrying life that is mine to protect. Every breath she takes, Every step she makes, I will be there. No one will hurt her. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating his office in stark, brutal lines. Luciano's figure was tense, coiled like a panther ready to strike. He turned back to Marco. Prepare for movement, and Marco. Yes, boss. Do not fail me. The line between personal vendetta and empire strategy had blurred. For Luciano, it no longer mattered. She was all that mattered. Outside, rain fell harder, drumming against the rooftops like war drums, and far below, in a darkened alley across the city, a black sedan idled, headlights off. Carter's men were watching, unaware that the wolf had already awoken. Luciano's voice cut through the storm in his office, low and lethal. No one touches her, no one. The rain fell harder, and in the distance, a shadow moved. Carter's operatives froze as a sleek black car appeared behind them, engine humming. In a single heartbeat, the game had shifted, and Luciano Rossi, the wolf, was already 3 moves ahead. The storm had come without warning, drumming against the city streets like a prelude to war. Thunder rolled low, echoing in alleys and empty corners, an omen no one could ignore. Isabella's contractions came early, each one a shock that stole her breath, sharp and urgent, pulling her into a world she hadn't prepared to enter yet. Sophia's hands were frantic, steady only by habit as she guided her sister into the back of the car. Rain-slicked streets glistened like mirrors beneath the headlights. Every turn, every stoplight felt too slow, the city crawling beneath their desperation. "Hold on, Bella, we're almost there," Sophia said, her voice tight, almost shaking despite the calm she tried to project. But danger moved faster than their small sedan. Carter's men, having tracked her movements, were closing in, silent, precise, methodical. Every street corner was a potential ambush, every reflection in a window a threat. Luciano sat in his black sedan, rain pelting the windshield, hands clenched on the wheel. The negotiation he had been attending, months of planning, delicate alliances, was already unraveling behind him. He didn't care. Not now. "The meeting can wait," he growled under his breath, voice like gravel. "She cannot." He floored the accelerator, the roar of the engine swallowed by the storm, leaving nothing but the rhythm of rain and the rapid drum of his pulse. Marco sat beside him, calm yet tense, watching as the wolf's fury became a single-minded force of nature. "They have eyes on her," Marco said, voice low, precise. "We'll need to secure every exit." Luciano's jaw tightened. "Then we move fast. No mistakes." Inside the hospital, chaos was an abstract concept. Nurses and doctors hurried through the sterile corridors, unaware of the dangerous storm about to enter their walls. Isabella's breathing was sharp, each contraction stealing more of her energy. Sophia gripped her hand, whispering words of encouragement. But inside, she felt the same fear that had driven them both across the city. Meanwhile, outside, Carter's operatives converged with silent precision. Their plan had been meticulous, designed to capture her without incident. But the wolf's shadow loomed larger than any calculated move. The automatic locks on the emergency doors clicked shut as Carter's team spread. The sterile halls now a battlefield. Footsteps echoed sharply against the tile. Every heartbeat seemed amplified, every sound a signal of approaching chaos. Luciano's men were already inside, moving in silence, scanning corners, clearing paths, and leaving no chance for a mistake. Marco coordinated, eyes sharp, voice barely audible over the storm outside. "He's here," Marco whispered into the comm. "Eyes on target." Luciano stormed through the double doors of the hospital lobby, a figure carved from shadows and purpose. His coat flared behind him with every stride, leather glinting wetly in the flickering fluorescent lights. Staff and visitors froze in place, instinctively sensing the danger, though none could comprehend it fully. He didn't glance left or right. His eyes were locked, precise. on the elevators that would take him to her. Every step carried weight. Every footfall was calculated. Every inch of his being screamed, "She is mine. No one touches her." The first sounds of confrontation echoed from the stairwell, a shouted order, the sharp click of weapons, and then the deafening crack of gunfire. Luciano ducked instinctively behind a nearby pillar, assessing. Carter's men were already there, their positions calculated, their intent clear. He signaled to Marco, who nodded, a silent agreement of deadly intent. They moved as one, shadows within the storm, clearing corridors with swift precision. In the maternity ward, Isabella cried out, clutching Sophia's hand as another contraction gripped her. Sweat beaded her forehead, and she felt raw in a way she had never known. Fear, pain, and anticipation mingled in a potent storm. Outside the ward, Carter's men positioned themselves, their weapons ready. They had underestimated one thing, the wolf's connection to this moment, the lengths he would go to protect what was his. Luciano's hand pressed against the wall, eyes scanning. He heard the sharp shuffle of feet, the metallic whisper of weapons being drawn. Every instinct screamed at him to move faster, to shield her before the enemy even knew she existed. Marco covered his flank, every movement fluid, every decision lethal. Luciano's mind was a machine of calculation now, but underneath it, an ember of raw, unfiltered emotion burned. Love, fear, rage, protection. The elevator doors opened, and the wolf moved like a shadow unleashed. He burst through the hallways with terrifying grace, his coat flaring behind him. The sterile smell of antiseptic clung to the air, mingling with the tension that had suddenly transformed the hospital into a battlefield. He rounded the corner, and there she was, Isabella, pale and strong, eyes clenched against pain, Sophia at her side, gripping her hand like a lifeline. Luciano's breath caught. Time slowed. She was holding the moment of life itself in her trembling hands. "Bella," he whispered, his voice breaking through the chaos, carrying a depth of feeling she hadn't heard in years. His eyes fell on the newborn, a tiny life she held close, innocent and unknowing of the storm surrounding them. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to 3 people in a sterile hospital room. Then, a shot rang out. Metal screamed, blood echoed. The door shattered as Carter's men breached the ward. Luciano reacted instantly. He flung himself in front of Isabella, shielding her, eyes locked on the threat. Every instinct honed through years of blood and power surged into action. Sophia screamed. Isabella cried out, gripping the baby closer. And through it all, Luciano's presence was a wall, a storm, an immovable force of nature. Gunfire rang again, bouncing off the walls. Equipment toppled. Nurses and doctors dove for cover, terrified. The wolf moved through the chaos like a phantom, precise, lethal, unstoppable. His hands fired with deadly accuracy. Every step, every move was calculated to protect the 2 lives in front of him. Amid the cacophony, he leaned down, voice low but fierce. "I was wrong," he growled. "I was a fool to let you go. My only weakness was thinking I could live without you." Isabella's eyes met his, tears blurring the sterile lights, pain and relief mingling. She clutched her child to her chest. A second shot rang out, closer this time. Luciano's body flared forward, blocking the line. Every muscle tensed, every thought focused on the 2 most important lives in the world. The corridors outside became a blur of movement, shadow and light, rain-slicked glass reflecting gunfire. Time fractured. Chaos enveloped them, and then silence fell, brief and deceptive. Luciano held Isabella and the baby close, scanning the room with eyes like storm clouds. A shadow moved at the far doorway. Carter stepped in, face pale, weapon raised, and a cold smile on his lips. Luciano's hand tensed around his pistol. "You're too late," Carter whispered. The wolf's lips curled into a deadly smile. This, he said, voice low, lethal, is just the beginning. Outside, the rain fell harder, drumming against the hospital roof like a warning. The hospital corridor erupted into chaos. The sterile air was torn apart by the sharp metallic staccato of gunfire. Bullets ricocheted off walls, echoing like thunder in the confined space. Alarms blared, a relentless shriek that mixed with screams of terror. The cries of frightened staff and panicked patients filling the halls. Luciano Rossi moved like a storm unleashed. Every motion was precise, deadly, fluid. He was both shadow and storm, a predator defending what was his. Each step was calculated, yet driven by raw, untamable emotion. Isabella clutched Alessia tightly, pressed to her chest, trembling with fear and awe. The baby's small cries were lost amid the chaos, but the sound only sharpened Luciano's focus. Nothing could harm them. Not tonight. Not ever. He raised his pistol, firing with brutal accuracy. Each shot was a heartbeat, each pull of the trigger a promise. No one touches them. A hail of bullets tore through the hall. Luciano felt the searing impact against his shoulder. Pain flared, sharp and blinding, but he refused to fall. He gritted his teeth, ignoring the blood that seeped through his coat. There was no room for weakness. Not now. Move! He barked to Marco and the team. His voice cut through the chaos like steel. Cover them! Clear the path! Marco obeyed instantly, moving like a shadow alongside him. His eyes were cold, trained, unwavering. They had trained for violence, for strategy, for the harshest truths of their world, but nothing could prepare them for the sight of the wolf, fighting not for empire, but for love. Another volley of gunfire ripped through the hallway. Luciano pivoted, shielding Isabella and Alessia with his body. The baby pressed safely against him. Sparks flew as bullets shredded the walls. Glass shattered from nearby windows, raining like jagged ice across the floor. Isabella's scream echoed above the gunfire. "Luciano!" The sound tore through him. A jolt of raw emotion, sharper than any bullet. He looked down at her, pain flaring in his chest, and gritted his teeth. "I'm right here," he roared, firing again, clearing the path. "I am not letting them touch you." Blood ran warm along his arm, dripping from a wound in his shoulder. The pain was sharp, gnawing, but he ignored it. There was no room for weakness. His family, his real family, was in his arms, and he would not fail them. Marco shouted orders, guiding their men with precision. "Left flank, suppress fire, move now!" The Rossi team responded like a single organism, every movement rehearsed yet instinctive, protecting the wolf and the women with their lives. Luciano's hand shook slightly as he fired again, but he forced himself to stay steady. Every breath, every heartbeat was synchronized with survival, with protection, with love. Alessia stirred, crying again, and he whispered gently, almost absent-mindedly amid the chaos. "It's okay. You're safe. I've got you." Gunfire erupted closer, deafening now. Carter's operatives had split into two teams, pressing from different angles. They moved with lethal precision, their training evident, but the wolf was faster, smarter, more focused than anyone had anticipated. He pivoted again, firing, ducking behind a toppled gurney. Sparks flew as a bullet ricocheted, embedding in the wall inches from his head. "Wolf!" Marco yelled. "You're hit!" Luciano ignored him. He couldn't stop. Not now. He couldn't let Isabella see him falter. He fired again, clearing the last stretch of corridor. Each step was agony, each movement fueled by adrenaline and unyielding will. Finally, Marco moved behind him, his massive frame steady as a shield. "Move," he commanded. He grabbed Luciano by the arm, tugging him backward. "No!" Luciano hissed, twisting, firing, protecting the path forward. But the pain was sharp now, undeniable, and blood poured freely from his shoulder. His strength wavered for the briefest moment. Isabella cried out again, seeing him falter. "Luciano, no!" Her voice was a dagger to his chest, sharper than any bullet. He forced himself upright, eyes blazing, and gritted his teeth. "I was wrong," he gasped, sweat and blood mixing on his face. "I was a fool to ever let you go." She moved closer, tears streaking her face, cupping his bloodied cheek. "Don't die on me now, Wolf," she whispered. "Please don't." Her words struck him harder than pain. Every shot, every wound, every scar he had ever carried seemed to burn anew, with purpose. He would survive. He had to survive. The group moved, the wolf leaning heavily against Marco. Rossi men formed a perimeter, suppressing Carter's team with deadly precision, buying them every second they needed. Bullet casings clinked on the floor, the scent of gunpowder filling the air. They reached a service exit, rain pouring in as they escaped into the alleyway. Luciano clutched Isabella and Alessia to him, every movement a delicate balance of protection and pain management. His shoulder burned, every step heavy with agony, but he refused to falter. Sophia ran beside them, holding the baby and shielding her sister as best she could. Their escape was frantic, dangerous, the city itself seeming to conspire against them with slippery streets and thunderous rain. Luciano's breathing was ragged. Blood streaked his face, dripping from his torn shoulder. He moved with deadly purpose, but his mind was singularly focused. They survive. They live. Nothing else matters. Carter emerged from the shadows, weapon raised, eyes cold, calculating. He observed the wolf's struggle, noting the blood, the staggered movements, the pain that would normally signal defeat. "Follow the blood," he whispered into his calm, a cruel, deliberate instruction. Luciano sensed movement from the corner of his eye, but he didn't falter. He fired, took cover, and continued moving, dragging his body forward with unrelenting determination. Every ounce of his being was committed to them, Isabella and Alessia, and no enemy could stand in his way. He stumbled briefly, blood slicking his grip on Isabella, but her small hands clutched him in return, trusting him completely. That trust was his anchor, his fury, his reason to push beyond human limits. They reached a temporary safe point, an alleyway hidden from the main streets, rain soaking them to the bone. Luciano collapsed partially against a wall, chest heaving, pain radiating from his shoulder. Marco steadied him, eyes sharp, scanning for any sign of Carter's reinforcements. "Boss, we can hold here for a moment," Marco said, voice low but urgent. "Catch your breath." Luciano shook his head, gritting his teeth. "No, keep moving. Every second we wait, they regroup. They'll come." Isabella pressed herself to him, shivering, holding Alessia tight. "Luciano, please stop. Please rest." He looked at her, eyes burning despite the blood and rain. "I rest when she is safe," he said simply, voice low and deadly. "Until then, I move, I fight, I protect." Sophia whispered words of encouragement, but the wolf barely heard her. His mind was a battlefield, scanning, calculating, reacting. Every step, every heartbeat, every breath was for them. From the shadows, Carter observed, eyes glinting with cold calculation. He spoke into his calm, voice low and lethal. "He's bleeding out. Follow the blood. Don't let them disappear. The wolf is wounded, but alive. We finish this tonight." Rain fell harder, turning the streets slick with reflections of flashing lights. Luciano didn't notice the eyes tracking them from above, didn't notice the traps being laid in silence. But one thing was certain, the war was far from over, and the wolf had only just begun. The dim light of the safe house cast long, trembling shadows across the walls. Rain pattered softly against the small windows, a constant whisper against the night. Luciano lay on a cot, his body aching, shoulder still raw and bandaged from the firefight. Every muscle protested, but his mind refused rest, not when they were here. Isabella sat nearby, Alessia cradled gently in her arms. The baby's tiny fingers flexed, curling instinctively around her mother's hand, and then almost instinctively brushed against Luciano's palm. He reached out, his bloodied hand trembling, and touched her small fingers. "She has your eyes," he whispered. voice rough but reverent, as though speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile peace in the room. Isabella looked at him, something soft flickering across her face. She allowed herself a fraction of calm, but the wound between them remained raw and unhealed. "You broke me once, Luciano," she said, her voice quiet but sharp, cutting through the thick tension of the room. "Why should I trust you again?" Luciano looked away, jaw tight, eyes flicking to the shadows. The baby stirred in Isabella's arms, and he could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on him, heavier than any empire he had ever controlled. "Because this time," he said slowly, deliberately, "I'll burn my world to keep you safe." His voice was steel and fire combined. "I will not let anyone touch you, not now, not ever." Isabella's hands shook slightly as she held Alessia. Tears threatened, but she refused to let them fall. "Words," she said, bitter. "Words are easy. Actions are what I need." Luciano's gaze snapped to hers, dark and intense. Every fiber of his being vibrated with promise, with threat, with an unrelenting will to protect. "Then watch. Watch me." The safe house was quiet now, but outside, the storm still raged. Luciano could feel it as he moved through the room, its rhythm echoing his heartbeat, each clap of thunder a reminder that the world beyond these walls was waiting, hunting. He could hear Marco's boots in the corner, cautious, controlled. Ever the sentinel. Marco approached quietly, leaning against the wall in the shadows. His eyes were sharp, calculating, unflinching. "Boss," he said, voice low, almost reverent, "we have a problem." Luciano didn't flinch. He had anticipated problems, prepared for chaos, expected betrayal, but Marco's words carried a weight beyond ordinary threat. "The family," Marco continued, eyes flicking to the fire, "they won't follow a Don who's gone soft. The child isn't yours." Luciano's hand tightened on the edge of the cot. The fire crackled, casting dancing lights across his face, illuminating his dark eyes and the sharp lines of his jaw. He stared into the flames as though trying to find the answer hidden in their heat. "Then I'll build a new family," he said finally, voice low but unyielding. "One that follows me because they believe in the blood that binds us, not the threats that scare them." Marco's eyes lingered on him, conflicted. Loyalty warred with duty, friendship warred with rules he had been taught to follow all his life. The wolf's world was changing, evolving into something dangerous, something unpredictable, and Marco understood the magnitude of the choice his boss had made. He moved silently, the sound of his gun snapping into place, echoing softly in the dim room. The metallic click was loud against the low hum of the safe house, a reminder that even here, in this fragile haven, danger was never far. Luciano felt the shift instantly, sensing the tension coil around him like a living thing. He didn't flinch, didn't move. He had faced assassins, rival families, betrayal, and betrayal again. But this was personal. Marco whispered almost inaudibly, "Forgive me, brother." Luciano's dark eyes locked onto Marco's. He could see the storm in his friend's gaze. The conflict, the fear, the loyalty twisted into a weapon of its own. His chest rose and fell with quiet fury, a controlled fire barely contained. Outside, the storm intensified. Rain pounded against the walls of the safe house, the wind shrieking like a chorus of ghosts. It mirrored the chaos outside, rivals regrouping, Carter scheming, the world waiting for the wolf to falter. Inside, the room remained still, tense, thick with the smell of blood, sweat, and gun oil. Luciano moved closer to Isabella, Alessia still in her arms, his hand brushing lightly over the baby's head, then clasping Isabella's in a silent, unbroken promise. "You hear me?" he said softly. Almost intimate, his voice a low growl that vibrated with power and devotion. "I don't care what they say. I don't care what they think. You and she are mine. No one else matters. No one else can touch you." Isabella met his gaze, finally allowing herself to see the raw truth in his eyes. This man, this Don, this wolf, was utterly committed. His love was dangerous, unyielding, and terrifyingly complete. The fire in the hearth flickered, casting sharp shadows across the room. Luciano stared into it, lost in thought, calculating, planning, imagining every step they would take to survive the storm outside. Marco lingered near the doorway, the gun heavy in his hand, his loyalty tested but unbroken. The wolf's family was changing, evolving, and Marco knew that the coming days would test them all. Rain hammered the roof with relentless fury, echoing like gunfire, a reminder of the world that awaited beyond these fragile walls. Luciano moved to sit beside Isabella, cradling Alessia gently. The baby stirred, cooing softly. He brushed her cheek with a thumb, marveling at the small, perfect life that had changed everything. "We'll survive this," he whispered, voice low but absolute. "I will burn the world if I must, but we will be safe." Isabella pressed her forehead to his, letting herself believe, just for a moment, that the man who had once walked away could now stay, could now protect, could now love. But Marco's shadow lingered, a silent reminder that the family, the legacy, the dangers outside had not vanished, and that loyalty and love often collided with deadly consequences. In the darkness, Marco loaded his gun with quiet precision. His eyes flicked to the sleeping baby, then to Luciano. A soft whisper escaped his lips, barely audible. "Forgive me, brother." The camera of fate paused on the trio. Luciano, Isabella, Alessia, safe, yet vulnerable, while Marco's trembling finger rested on the trigger. Outside, storm clouds rumbled, signaling the chaos yet to come. The safe house was silent for a moment, the storm outside replaced by an eerie stillness. Luciano sat in the dim light, cradling Alessia, his shoulder still bandaged, muscles tense with lingering pain. His mind raced, calculating, anticipating every threat. But this quiet was deceptive. Marco stood in the shadows, eyes dark, conflicted. Loyalty and duty tore at him in a way nothing ever had. The family council demanded results, demanded obedience, demanded sacrifice. And tonight, Marco had to decide: deliver Isabella and her child to the empire that had built them, or follow the bond of brotherhood forged over decades. "Boss," Marco said softly, voice almost a whisper, "the council is moving. They want her. They want the baby. It's the only way to secure the family." Luciano's gaze was sharp, unyielding. "You know I'll never let them touch her." Marco hesitated, fingers tightening around the edge of the doorway. Duty and loyalty warred in his chest. "I know, boss, but the family, your empire, it's crumbling. They will destroy everything we built if you refuse." Luciano leaned forward, eyes glinting like a blade. "Then they will burn, trying, and I will rise from the ashes with what matters most." The tension shattered with the sudden roar of engines outside. Carter had found them. His men moved with lethal precision, weapons drawn, ready to take the wolf down once and for all. "Carter," Luciano growled under his breath, "always the opportunist." Gunfire erupted, tearing through the air like thunder, shattering the fragile walls of the safe house. Dust and splinters rained down as bullets tore through wood and metal. Marco immediately moved to cover Luciano, positioning himself between his brother and the hail of fire. Luciano fired with deadly precision, every shot a calculated promise. No one touches them. Carter's operatives were skilled, trained, but none could match the wolf's intensity, the combination of fury and protection driving him past limits. Then Marco froze for the briefest moment, caught in hesitation, the weight of betrayal and duty pressing down like steel. In that instant, a bullet meant for Luciano found its mark in Marco's chest instead. Time slowed. Marco fell, blood staining his coat, a gasp escaping his lips. He landed hard, sliding across the floor as if the universe itself had paused to witness the betrayal of fate. Luciano's heart thundered, rage and despair colliding. He dropped to his knees beside Marco, clutching his shoulder. "No, Marco, stay with me!" The older man's eyes fluttered open, blood streaking his face. He reached up, trembling, and placed a hand on Luciano's arm. "Boss, she made you human again." "Don't waste it," he murmured, voice weak but resolute. Tears burned in Luciano's eyes, but his jaw set hard. He looked to the battlefield outside the shattered windows, to Carter's forces pressing in, and felt the storm of vengeance ignite fully within him. Luciano rose, his dark eyes aflame with fury and determination. Every ounce of his being became a weapon. He moved with unstoppable force, dismantling Carter's men with calculated precision. Every corner, every shadow became a killing ground, and every shot fired was a message. Do not cross the wolf. Using his extensive intelligence network, Luciano exposed Carter's corruption to the world. Leaks to the press, intercepted communications, and secret recordings painted the agent as a traitor to his own cause, a man who had used innocence as bait. Carter's empire crumbled in real time. His operatives scattered, his alliances fractured, and his influence evaporated. Luciano didn't pause. He orchestrated the destruction of every threat to Isabella and Alessia, using fire, sabotage, and deception to erase anyone who could harm them. The battle over, the safe house secured, Luciano knew they still could not remain. Carter's reach might be broken, but remnants of his influence lingered. They needed a clean slate, a new life beyond the world of shadows that had hunted them relentlessly. He staged his own death. Evidence, blood, a convincing scene, everything to convince the world that the wolf, the dawn, the feared Luciano Rossi, was gone. The persona that had ruled with fear and respect was sacrificed so the man beneath could live freely, protect, and love. Isabella held Alessia close, tears streaking her face as the world they had known fell away. Finally, for the first time, she felt the possibility of peace, of survival, of love without constant threat. Luciano watched from afar, hidden, his heart aching at the distance, yet proud that the only lives that truly mattered were safe. Weeks later, a funeral was held. A casket lay beneath a stark, gray sky, attended by mourners who believed the wolf was gone. Isabella stood near it, the baby swaddled in her arms. Tears ran freely down her cheeks as she whispered into the rain-soaked air. "He sacrificed everything for us," she murmured, her voice trembling, "for our life." She placed a trembling hand on the casket. And in that moment of grief, her eyes caught a faint glimmer, something white, delicate, out of place among the black and gray of mourning. A single white wolf pendant had been placed atop the coffin. Her breath caught. The pendant glinted in the rain, a silent, unspoken message from the man she loved, the man she thought was dead. Luciano's signature, his presence, his promise. "I am here. Always." Her lips trembled in a mixture of hope and disbelief. She clutched Alessia tighter, heart pounding. Somewhere, in the shadows, a figure watched, unseen, a smile hidden beneath the rain-soaked hood. The wolf was alive, and the story, far from over, was about to take its next impossible turn. As Isabella stared at the pendant, her vision blurred with tears. A quiet, almost imperceptible movement caught her eye. A shadow detached from the tree line at the edge of the cemetery, tall, unmistakable, and dark against the gray sky. Luciano Rossi, alive, watched them both. His eyes softened at the sight of Isabella and Alessia, but the faintest glint of stormy resolve remained. He whispered to himself, a promise carried on the wind. "This is not the end. It's only the beginning." A year had passed since the world had ended and begun again. Tuscany's golden hills stretched endlessly, dotted with cypress trees swaying in the gentle breeze. The sun poured its warmth across the landscape, painting everything with a soft, forgiving light. The villa, once crumbling and abandoned, now stood proudly on a hill overlooking the sea, its stones repaired, terraces restored, the scent of fresh paint mingling with the wildflowers that crept along the walls. Luciano worked tirelessly, hands calloused, muscles taut with the labor of rebuilding. Each stone he laid, each beam he lifted, was a testament not to power or fear, but to life reclaimed, to a future carefully constructed. His tattoos glinted faintly in the sun, reminders of battles fought and survived. His leather jacket long gone, sleeves rolled up. He was no longer the wolf who ruled with fear. He was a man determined to protect what mattered most. Alessia toddled nearby, her small feet pattering against the newly laid cobblestones. Isabella moved gracefully among the garden beds, planting herbs and flowers, her hands nurturing life as she had nurtured hope. The villa was alive, not with crime or whispers of violence, but with laughter, growth, and love. Luciano paused, wiping sweat from his brow, and watched them both. Alessia's laughter rang like bells across the terrace as she reached for Isabella's hand. He felt something stir deep within, a warmth that had nothing to do with power or fear, but everything to do with family. He walked toward them, his steps slow, deliberate, savoring the simple act of presence. Isabella looked up, a faint smile lighting her face, and Alessia's tiny fingers curled around his hand. "Careful, little wolf," Luciano murmured with a rare smile, lifting Alessia into his arms. She giggled, the sound pure and untainted by the darkness of their past. Isabella's eyes softened as she watched him, noticing the subtle lines of fatigue and scar tissue, the faint tremor in his hands from old wounds, but also the strength, the resilience, and the devotion. She saw the man who had once ruled empires of fear, now ruling a kingdom built from love. Days passed in a rhythm of quiet joy. Luciano repaired the villa from dawn to dusk, Isabella tended the garden and cooked, and Alessia explored the terraces, collecting flowers and chasing butterflies. Each evening, they would sit together on the veranda, watching the sun dip beneath the horizon, painting the sky in hues of amber and rose. Luciano had come to understand the true meaning of power. It wasn't in fear or wealth, but in the ability to protect, to nurture, to love without reservation. He taught Alessia how to skip stones across the sea, showing her patience and care. He helped Isabella plant new seeds in the garden, kneeling beside her, his hands muddy and alive with creation instead of destruction. One evening, the sky burned orange and crimson, reflecting in the tranquil waters below. Luciano called Isabella to the terrace, his eyes dark with emotion, deep as the ocean before them. He knelt slowly, deliberately letting the world wait for a heartbeat. From his hand he produced a small rusted key, its edges worn, its weight symbolic. "The key to our home," he whispered, voice rough but gentle, carrying all the gravity of his journey, all the promises unspoken over years of fear and loss. "The only empire I ever want to rule is the one we build here, with you, with her." He gestured to Alessia, asleep in Isabella's arms. Tears welled in Isabella's eyes, the culmination of grief, fear and love converging in that single moment. Her hand reached for his, fingers trembling as she took the key. "Yes," she whispered through tears, a soft affirmation that spoke of forgiveness, hope, and the possibility of a life finally free from shadows. Alessia stirred, her small legs wobbling uncertainly. She took her first steps across the terrace, arms outstretched, and Luciano caught her in his arms. Her laughter mingled with the wind, and in that instant the villa, the hills, and the sea felt alive with a serenity that had once been impossible. Luciano held them both close, letting himself feel the fullness of peace that came not from dominance, wealth, or power, but from the fragile, extraordinary life he had fought to protect. He watched the sun disappear beyond the horizon, and for the first time in decades, he felt whole. He had been a king who commanded fear, a wolf who prowled in shadows, but that life had been given up willingly, traded for a single precious heart. In losing everything he once thought essential, Luciano found what he had truly been searching for all along: love, family, and the kind of peace that could not be taken by bullets, betrayal, or empire. The wind whispered through the cypress trees, carrying with it the distant call of the sea. The villa glowed softly in the twilight, alive with laughter, life, and the echo of promises kept. And Luciano, once feared across nations, smiled as he held Isabella and Alessia close, knowing finally that the wolf had become a man. He was a king who gave up his throne for a single precious heart, and in losing everything, he finally found peace.